Have you ever stopped to think that your life could change completely because of a simple detail? A distraction, a step out of the ordinary, an unexpected glint in the sand. It seems exaggerated, right? But what if I told you that's exactly what happened to an ordinary man during a solitary walk on a beach in the United States? No plans, no rush, just him and the sound of the sea, until something shiny in the sand caught his eye. A bottle. It wasn't trash. It was history. Inside it, a real handwritten message filled with despair, hope, and an ancient secret. No, it's not an urban legend. And no, you're definitely not prepared for where this story will take you. What seemed like mere curiosity turned into a journey that shook the foundations of an entire city, reopened family wounds, and unearthed truths many wanted to keep buried. But the most unbelievable thing? This story isn't just about the past, it's about the present. About me, about you. About how fear can silence, but never erase, a truth. About how courage, forgiveness, affection, and empathy have a power that transcends generations. What you're about to see will stir your deepest emotions and maybe, just maybe, awaken something dormant within you. This isn't just a story. It's a call, an invitation to look at life with new eyes, to realize that every act of kindness matters, that every forgotten life has value, and that sometimes a message thrown into the sea returns precisely to those with the right heart to hear it. But beware, what begins as a mystery will transform into one of the most moving, dangerous, and transformative stories you've ever seen. So take a deep breath, because you're about to discover that when destiny calls, it can even come in a bottle. That morning, when the wind whispered ancient secrets among the dunes and the sea seemed to sing a forgotten song, he walked aimlessly, like someone searching for answers without knowing the questions. The deserted beach was his silent refuge, his temple of solitude, where the noise of the world gave way to the symphony of introspection. The sun, high in the sky like a beacon of wisdom, cast a shimmering reflection on something partially buried. In the soft sand, the subtle yet persistent glow drew his eyes to it, as if the universe were inviting him to discover something greater than himself. As he dug with his hands, he felt the touch of the rough, ancient glass, as if holding a piece of time. It was an aged bottle, soiled by salt and marked by the ravages of life, but there was something in its presence that exuded power. With trembling fingers, he lifted it as if finding a sacred relic. It was as if fate had chosen that precise moment to bring about a turning point. And when he noticed the parchment inside, delicately rolled, he felt a mixture of fear, curiosity, and hope in his chest. He opened the bottle carefully, as if afraid of breaking not the glass, but the bond with the mystery that formed within. The paper was yellowed, fragile, the ink slightly faded, handwritten, charged with emotion and urgency, leaping out at the eye as if crying for help across the centuries. "Please, if anyone reads this, help me," it began. It wasn't just a letter. It was a cry trapped in a bottle, a plea cast into the sea with the almost naive hope of being heard by someone with an open heart. And that someone, by chance or not, was him. With each line, he felt the weight of a life entwined in those words. There was pain there, but there was also a flame of perseverance, a subtle courage that blossomed between the lines. The letter spoke of fear and loneliness, but also of compassion, of an almost childlike desire for redemption, for reconciliation. It was impossible to read and not be moved. It was impossible to turn away, because there, between the lines, he recognized a piece of himself, someone who had once also needed help and was saved by the kindness of a stranger. Sitting on the sand, with the sea as witness and the sky as accomplice, he reread that message over and over. Each time he read it, he discovered something new, not only about the writer, but about who he was. How often do we experience messages like that, not in bottles, but in sad looks, in screaming silences, in subtle gestures of someone asking for help? That letter was a reminder of the power of empathy, of the wisdom that comes when we listen to another with our hearts. In that moment, he felt a calling. It wasn't just someone else's story, it was a mission. And when he rose from the sand, reverently holding the letter, he was no longer the same man. There was a purpose there, and with it, a burning desire to seek the truth, to carry out that request as if it were his own. The universe had entrusted him with a story, and he was ready to be its messenger. But little did he know that that decision would lead him deeper into a mystery than he ever imagined. Back at his small wooden cottage, where the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks seemed to echo his own heart, he sat at the table as if about to begin a ritual. He spread the letter out on the antique tabletop, smoothing it delicately, as if touching a living memory. The words seemed to pulse there before him. The author of the message wrote with soul, as if depositing the last spark of hope on a piece of paper. They spoke of an invisible prison, of a place where the days were all the same and the nights carried the weight of uncertainty. Fear was present, but it wasn't the protagonist. It was hope that guided that writing, a fragile but persistent hope. It was as if the person knew that perhaps no one would ever find that bottle, but they wrote anyway. That was what touched the protagonist most, the courage to not give up, even when all seemed lost. And deep down, wasn't that the purest definition of resilience? As he reread the passage where the author spoke of a secret that, if revealed, could change lives, a chill ran down his spine. This was no longer just a letter. It was an invitation to delve into an enigma shrouded in humanity, altruism, and perhaps danger. Who would trust the unknown so much as to entrust such an intimate truth? The letter mentioned erased names, places half distorted by time, and feelings so vivid they seemed to leap from the page. There was an ancient pain there, but there was also love, a love silenced by circumstances, but still burning between the lines. And the protagonist, guided by a force greater than logic, felt he had been chosen. Not by chance, but by a kindred spirit, by empathy, by compassion. It was as if the words whispered to him, "You understand, you feel, so go." And he, between fear and courage, accepted the call. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept imagining the face behind that writing. Was it a man, a woman, young, old? The letter didn't say, but it left clues. There was a passage that spoke of a stolen childhood, of wrong choices, of forgiveness that never came. And there, the protagonist found himself thinking about his own pain, his own mistakes, the very nights he longed to be heard, understood, welcomed. That letter, though old, spoke with an incredibly contemporary voice, as if each syllable were imbued with emotional wisdom, with an intelligence that only pain refined by hope can teach. And perhaps that's why he couldn't put it aside. Because it spoke to what's most human in us, the desire to be saved and at the same time, to save. It was the beginning of an adventure, not only physical, but spiritual. And when morning came, he already knew the next step was to find where that voice came from, even if it meant digging into the past and facing. The nearest coastal town seemed frozen in time. Narrow cobblestone streets, dusty shopfronts, cafes with wrought iron tables, and residents bearing the weight of memories in their eyes. It was there that the protagonist decided to begin his journey. He arrived with firm but humble steps, as if respecting another's territory. Each conversation was a piece he tried to fit into the puzzle. First, he visited the public library, where the books held more than stories. They held forgotten secrets. He searched through old newspapers and records of disappearances, and found vague references to people who had vanished without a trace. The dates matched the letter's writing style. Excitement overcame him with each new discovery, but also a feeling of insecurity. What if he was going too far? With each clue, one knot unraveled, but another tightened. It was like trying to navigate a maze without a map, guided only by intuition, courage, and the faith that he was doing the right thing. Between the park benches and the church pews, the protagonist approached the elderly, those who carried stories in their wrinkles and silences. He sat to listen, not to question. It was there that empathy shone brightest. The butcher remembered a mysterious disappearance in 1979. The retired teacher spoke of a couple who vanished out of nowhere. And a teary-eyed woman simply whispered, "There are things it's best not to touch, my son." But it was too late to back down. The search for truth doesn't end once you know the scent of injustice. And as the stories intertwined, revealing local legends like the one about the abandoned lighthouse where screams are said to be heard at dusk, or the house on the hill where no one has entered for decades, the protagonist realized that the mystery was deeper than the sea that bathed that village. It was a dense web where the past hid beneath layers of silence, fear, guilt, and curiously, misunderstood generosity. The forgotten archives revealed something even stranger, a name that repeated itself in different forms at different times. It was like an echo. A certain Elijah, sometimes referred to as a gardener, other times as a poet, or simply the boy who wrote letters. The protagonist wrote down every detail, guided by a combination of logic and perspicacity. And there, he began to use more than his curiosity. He used his emotional intelligence. He noticed, for example, that certain people hesitated when speaking, averted their gaze, as if hiding an old pain. And it is in these moments that humanity reveals itself. He learned that the truth often lies not hidden in documents, but in the eyes of those who lived. Therefore, he began to observe more than listen. And it was thus, amidst this sea of imprecise information, that he felt something pulse within him. Something told him he was on the right path. Even though everything was hazy, hope no longer belonged solely to the letter's author. It was his too. And this silent connection led him directly to an encounter that would change the course of the investigation. The house stood at the end of the main street, nearly hidden by a tangle of twisted trees and flowers that seemed to spring from memory. The aged wooden door creaked as if it hadn't been opened for visitors in a long time. He wasn't sure exactly what had brought him there. Perhaps it was the name he'd found scrawled on an old newspaper clipping, or perhaps simply a feeling. He knocked lightly and waited. The woman who appeared before him had the passage of time written all over her face, but her eyes had the youth of someone who still harbors love within. Her name was Eleanor, and upon hearing the name of this Elijah, her expression changed. A discreet tear formed, not of sadness, but of reunion. "You found the bottle, didn't you?" she said, before he could even show her anything. That sentence pierced the protagonist like a well-aimed arrow. It was as if the story had led him to the only person capable of illuminating the darkness of that mystery. The connection between them was immediate, forged not by words, but by understanding. Sitting in the shade of an ancient tree in the backyard, he listened intently as Eleanor spoke of a time that seemed straight out of a black and white film. She told of a dreamy young man with a gentle soul who wrote letters as if planting seeds of hope in the world. She spoke with affection, but also with pain. The story was filled with compassion and longing. According to her, Elijah was someone who saw beauty where no one else did, who helped neighbors without asking for anything in return, who carried a deep sadness, yet smiled nonetheless. He believed in the power of kindness like few others, she said as she gazed at the horizon. And amidst these memories, she revealed something even more intriguing. Elijah had written that letter not out of desperation alone, but as a way to protect someone. That secret, it wasn't just his, she confided. The protagonist, now more engaged than ever, understood that it wasn't just about finding the author of the message. It was about understanding the collective pain that story carried. And Eleanor, with her calm wisdom, became his beacon amidst the storm. As the days passed, Eleanor became not only a source of information, but an emotional ally. She was the one who reminded him of the importance of resilience and perseverance. When the path seemed closed, her words brought light. Together, they pieced together a timeline, organized clues, and shared silences laden with meaning. The story ceased to be merely investigative and became transformative. It was as if that connection between generations, between two souls driven by a common purpose, was the answer to many questions that had never been asked. Their relationship was marked by collaboration, by the mutual initiative to discover not only what happened to Elijah, but also what his story could teach the world. Eleanor wasn't just a character from the past, she was a bridge between yesterday and today. And the protagonist, feeling more inspired than ever, began to realize that the true mystery might not lie in the letter, but in everything it was capable of awakening in those willing to listen to it with an open heart. Time seemed to fold in on itself as new revelations emerged from the shadows of history. On a cold, foggy morning, Eleanor handed the protagonist a locked wooden box she had kept since 1982. "He asked me to keep this in case something happened," she said in a whispered voice, her gaze heavy with memories. Upon opening the box, among letters, sepia photographs, and small personal items, lay the heart of the story, an unsent farewell letter sealed with red wax, in which Elijah recounted his deepest pain, the forbidden love for a boy named Samuel, rejected by his family, hidden for decades, silenced by a society with no room for sincerity. The protagonist read that confession with trembling hands. Each word carried weight, but also courage. It was a story of true love, pushed into the dark corners by intolerance, shame, and the world's ignorance. And in that moment, the protagonist felt the world spin. This story wasn't just about a disappearance. It was about identity, about loss, about the price of living your truth. The deeper he delved into Elijah's life, the more he realized the invisible threads connecting him to that narrative. He discovered that his own mother's father, a man rarely spoken of in the family, was Samuel's brother. The pieces fit together with almost frightening precision. It was as if the universe were stitching together the two lineages, reconnecting loose ends through time. That secret, kept for generations, crossed oceans and silences to reach him. And then, something powerful manifested within him, the certainty that his search was no accident. It was reconciliation in its purest form. The story wasn't just about Elijah and Samuel. It was about his own lineage, about what had been hidden, silenced, forgotten. It filled him with hope, but also with fear. Because touching old wounds requires courage, it requires resilience. And he knew, by unearthing this truth, he would disturb family structures, wounds that might still be raw. Upon hearing of this family connection, Eleanor wept. Not with sadness, but with liberation. He always said that one day, someone in his lineage would hear his cry, she murmured, touching the papers as if they were sacred relics. And it was then that the protagonist realized the true impact of it all. What began as a simple walk on the beach was in fact an ancient journey, a call to humanity. That night, gazing at the starry sky, he reflected on the power of a message and how a single story can span time and transform lives. He felt overcome by a profound sense of gratitude for having been chosen, for experiencing this, for being able to be a link between past and present. And although he knew the revelation was only the beginning of a new stage, he felt stronger, more whole, and clearer within. But what he didn't yet know was that this revealed truth would jeopardize everything he had achieved so far. The morning after the big revelation, something shifted in the air. The silence that had once been welcoming became unsettling, and the eyes on the streets carried a different weight. The protagonist began to notice strange movements around Eleanor's house. A dark car parked across the street, the same man passing by the cafe twice at unusual times, and even an anonymous letter left on the cottage door, with letters cut out of a magazine. "Stop digging or someone will get hurt," It seemed straight out of a thriller, but it was real, palpable, dangerous. And the most disturbing thing was knowing that someone was willing to do anything to keep that secret buried. The feeling of fear mixed with adrenaline, and doubt began to erode clarity. How far should he go? But then came the memory of Elijah, of the handwritten pain, of the cry for help thrown into the sea. It was impossible to stop. Because there are moments in life when courage becomes a moral obligation, and danger a test of one's faith. Taking precautions, the protagonist began to move with more intelligence and strategy. He began to avoid certain paths, used a hidden recorder in interviews, and stored digital copies of everything he discovered in encrypted clouds. With Eleanor, he combined signals and codes like two detectives in a classic film. But there was also the emotional weight, the constant fear that someone would hurt her. It gnawed at him from within. And it was in this context that he discovered that resistance is not born solely of physical strength, but of emotional resilience, the ability to stand firm even when everything around him seems to be crumbling. On a particularly tense night, his room was ransacked while he was out. Nothing was taken. It was a clear warning. And it was there that he realized he was fighting not just oblivion, but also interests. Perhaps influential family members, perhaps local figures who feared the impact of the truth. In any case, it was now a matter of justice. And justice, when it concerns human lives, cannot be postponed. The most curious and disturbing thing was realizing how the silence became louder. People who had previously spoken openly now avoided contact. Doors that had opened were now closed. The small coastal town began to show another face, that of fear. And behind the fear, there were secrets. The protagonist realized that Elijah's story was not only tragic, but dangerous because, somehow, it touched on something bigger. Perhaps it involved people still alive, hidden connections, truths that could ruin reputations. And yet, he pressed on because he understood the value of truth. He knew that humanity only advances when it has the courage to look at its own wounds. And with each step, he carried with him more than a mission. He carried the understanding that his quest was also a way to redeem himself. But what he didn't yet know was that, amidst this tension, a new discovery would emerge, and with it, the need to decide between safety and justice. The sense of injustice was now stronger than any fear. The protagonist no longer acted merely out of curiosity or a sense of mission. He was driven by a visceral impulse for reparation. He felt that Elijah, Samuel, and all those silenced by shame or society's ignorance finally needed a space of dignity. So he sought out lawyers, local activists, historians, and journalists. He told his story honestly and with substance, presenting documents, evidence, and accounts. But it didn't take long for him to realize that, in systems rooted in silence, the truth doesn't always find immediate resonance. Bureaucracies delayed cases. Influential figures tried to discredit his investigation. Still, he remained steadfast. Because the hope of changing something, even just a comma in the official narrative, was greater than any resistance. He felt like a messenger of something that transcends time. And even in the most arid meetings, where papers spoke louder than emotions, he brought with him the wisdom learned from pain, that every injustice is a crack in human dignity, and every silenced voice is a loss for us all. With every closed door, a new one opened, even if only a crack. There were those who understood, who saw between the lines of the story, the same struggle for affection, recognition, respect. A young clerk at the registry office, for example, was the one who discovered an incorrectly filed document, a forged death certificate, filled out in haste, without an official signature. This evidence dismantled the official version of Elijah's disappearance. At another point, a local journalist published a discreet but impactful article that reignited debate in the community. Gradually, other victims of similar stories began writing to the protagonist, sharing their pain, their losses, their desire for reconciliation with the past. It was moving. There was something deeply human in that silent network of support. That search for justice was becoming bigger than him. It was now a movement of inspiration. And even with threats, with days of insecurity, he continued. Because justice, when sought with courage and humility, transforms not only the facts, but the people around him. In a defining moment, he was invited to speak at a municipal assembly. He took the pulpit with trembling hands but a firm voice. He told everything, from the bottle in the sand to the secret revealed. He spoke of fear, of love, of altruism, of forgiveness. And in the end, he made a plea, not legal, but human. If we are not capable of protecting the truths that hurt us, then we are not worthy of the truths that set us free. There was silence, then tears, then applause. And in that moment, he knew the journey was worth it. There was still no final solution. The opposing forces still existed, but the seed had been planted. And like every seed planted with honesty and emotional intelligence, it would germinate in due time. The protagonist emerged from that assembly stronger, more whole. However, he didn't know that fate had yet another surprise in store for him. One that would change everything once again, and it would come from where he least expected it. A reunion. With a presence everyone thought lost forever. It was a golden afternoon. The kind where the sun seems to want to stay a little longer before disappearing. The protagonist was reviewing files in an old community center, reorganized by young volunteers, when an unmarked box caught his eye. Inside, among old photo albums and yellowed papers, was a cassette tape with a hand-scrawled name, Samuel M., that made his heart race. As he listened to the recording with the help of an old, borrowed recorder, a hoarse, halting voice said, "If someone ever hears this, it means Elijah hasn't been forgotten." Emotion overwhelmed him. It was him, Samuel, alive, or at least, he had been alive after his disappearance. The tape was a kind of diary, where the man recounted how he had to flee in hiding, after receiving threats because of his relationship with Elijah. He recounted the years he lived in seclusion, in a small community in the Colorado mountains, surviving thanks to the help of people who understood his pain. It was a tale of exile, but also of overcoming. And in that instant, the protagonist understood. The search wasn't over, it was simply changing course. With Eleanor's help, he tracked down medical records, anonymous donations, and old letters. The journey was now urgent. It was like a race against time. And surprisingly, the trail led him to a discreet rehabilitation clinic in a small town on the outskirts of Denver. There, after much insistence, a nurse led him to a sunny garden, where a white-haired man with a peaceful expression and a gaze filled with silence was feeding birds breadcrumbs. It was him, Samuel, still alive. Seeing him, the protagonist felt his legs weaken. It wasn't just emotion. It was profound commotion. It was witnessing the impossible. Samuel, upon hearing him say the name Elijah, brought his hands to his face and wept. He wept like someone who had waited a lifetime for that moment. The two talked for hours. He confirmed everything. The love, the escape, the pact of silence to protect both their lives. He confirmed that the bottle was part of Elijah's plan to keep the hope of reunion alive. And in that garden, among birds and memories, the protagonist heard firsthand the story the world needed to know. But the most impressive thing wasn't just the reunion. It was the emotional impact it had on the protagonist. Seeing Samuel with his fragility and his strength, with his pain and his hope, made him understand the true meaning of his journey. It was as if he had rescued not just a person, but a part of humanity itself, a collective memory that needed light. Samuel, with kindness and sincerity, offered the protagonist all the letters, photos, and recordings he still kept, as if to say, "Now it's your turn." And in that gesture, there was so much power, so much trust, so much surrender. The protagonist left the clinic with tears in his eyes, but a full heart. He knew he now held the final piece in his hands. He knew he needed to return to the coastal city, but what he didn't yet know was that, upon his return, he would face the most difficult moment of his entire journey, the public revelation of the truth and the impact it would have on everyone involved. The small town's community hall was packed. Longtime residents, curious onlookers, young students, journalists, and even city officials were present. The protagonist took the makeshift stage with a serenity that only conviction can provide. In his pockets were the original letters from Elijah and Samuel, along with the tapes, photos, and documents that validated each part of the story. He began to speak calmly, almost conversationally, as if not presenting a case, but sharing a life. He spoke of love, not romanticized love, but courageous love that defies convention. He spoke of fear, of loneliness, of reconciliation. The audience listened in absolute silence, immersed in the narrative. With each new revelation, expressions of surprise, discreet tears, sighs. When Samuel appeared in a video recorded at the clinic, recounting in his own voice what he experienced, many could not contain their emotion. It was the truth coming to light, not as a blow, but as a balm, painful, yes, but necessary. It was as if finally a debt had been paid to history. The reaction was mixed. Some cried, embracing, as if they had experienced it together. Others, especially the more conservative, left in silence, visibly shaken. There was resistance, of course, but the impact was undeniable. The next day, the story made regional headlines and became the subject of independent online programs. A local teacher who had taught generations in that city went on the radio and declared, "I'm ashamed that we turned a blind eye for so long. This cannot happen again." The speech went viral. The story triggered a domino effect. People who had hidden their identities began to speak out. Young people felt safer living authentically. And the protagonist, although emotionally exhausted, knew he was witnessing a cultural shift in real time. It was the power of emotional intelligence, sincerity, and altruism transforming pain into a path. The city would never be the same again. And neither would he. Now he was seen not as a curious outsider, but as a channel of healing. As he walked through the streets of the now different city, he reflected on everything that had happened. He remembered the bottle buried in the sand and how a simple message could unearth not just a secret, but an entire humanity. The journey, which began with a gesture of curiosity, revealed itself to be an epic of empathy, understanding, justice, and perseverance. But there was also a wait. What now? What to do with all this? It was a question that throbbed strongly, but whose answer was beginning to emerge within him. The story didn't end there. It couldn't end, because what he had begun was not just an investigation, but a bridge. A bridge between generations, between wounds and healing, between silence and voice. And the next step needed to be taken with the same honesty that guided each page turned, each truth revealed. He knew the end of his physical journey was approaching, but a new choice awaited him: what to do with this legacy. Time passed. Not much, but enough for the dust of the headlines to settle and the city to return to its gentle, now different, rhythm. The protagonist, still there, gazed at the sea with the eyes of someone who had learned to see beyond the waves. He decided that Elijah and Samuel's legacy would not be shelved in archives or summarized in an article. No, that story needed to live on. Touch hearts, inspire. With the help of Eleanor and Samuel himself, he started an educational project called Messages in the Sand, aimed at schools and community centers. He held lectures, exhibitions, and discussion groups on empathy, courage, diversity, forgiveness, and respect. More than teaching facts, he sought to awaken values. In each city he visited, he left a replica of the original bottle as a symbol of hope. It moved, created connection. Many saw themselves in Elijah's pain, in Samuel's loneliness, in the silent call that echoed through time. It was as if each new person who heard the story also became the guardian of a piece of that secret. The transformation wasn't just collective, but internal. The protagonist, once a curious man searching for something greater, was now an instrument of inspiration. He realized that the true power of kindness lies not only in grand gestures, but in the daily choice to listen, welcome, and understand. That legacy made him reevaluate his own history, his choices, and his relationships. He began calling his parents more often, listening more attentively to friends, offering kindness even on cloudy days. The journey taught him that healing is a two-way street. By restoring the dignity of Elijah and Samuel's story, he also restored parts of himself. Over time, he received invitations to tell the story at universities, podcasts, and international forums. And each time he told it, he felt the same emotion as the first day. Because that story didn't age, it matured. It became stronger, more necessary. And with each new sharing, a new cycle of empathy, reconciliation, and overcoming was born. The last time he saw Samuel, already weakened by age, they sat together by a lake. Samuel held the protagonist's hand tightly and said, "You gave me back the life that was taken from me." That sealed everything. It was the end of a cycle, but also the beginning of many others. Returning to the beach where it all began, the protagonist dug a small hole in the sand and left a new bottle there with a different message. It wasn't a cry for help, but a letter of gratitude and courage. It said something like, "If you found this, remember, every life matters, every story has value, and every truth deserves to be heard." Afterward, he sat, looked out at the sea, and smiled, because he knew, with every fiber of his being, that he hadn't just lived an extraordinary adventure, he had become a part of it. And who knows, someone, somewhere, will one day find that new bottle and begin their own journey of discovery, humanity, and transformation. And now that you've followed this journey from beginning to end, I ask you with all sincerity, what would you do if you found a message in a bottle? Would you have the courage to follow the call, even without guarantees, even with fear, even knowing it might stir old wounds? This true story is more than a mystery revealed. It's a mirror, a powerful reminder that each of us carries a silent mission: to listen, to welcome, to act. Because sometimes what the world needs isn't more opinions, but more listening, more empathy, more purposeful action. Are you ignoring the small signs life has been sending you? Those moments that seem coincidental, but deep down are invitations to experience something greater. How many people around you are crying out for help, but without words? Are you ready to become the kind of person who transforms pain into learning, loneliness into connection, silence into voice? This story has shown that truth, when guided by compassion and courage, has the power to heal generations. And maybe, just maybe, it's your turn to do this for someone, or even for yourself. So, if this story touched your heart in any way, if it awakened something deep inside, do this: subscribe to the channel now, turn on the notification bell, and share this video with someone you love. Here, we tell real stories that change lives. And who knows, maybe the next life-changing moment will be yours. Don't underestimate the power of a well-delivered message and a heart willing to hear it.